Let's get to former Speaker of the House of the New Hampshire House of Representatives is with us. Bill O'Brien on the line. Bill, we're live at Al Letizio World Headquarters here in Wyndham. Also with us is Bruce Breton is with us. I know you're a big friend of his. He's a senior advisor to Corey Lewandowski and to Steve Negron, who was with us earlier running for Congress. And Bill, also with us is your good friend and House member, Fred Doucette, is with us. We're live in Wyndham. Mr. Speaker, great to have you.
I appreciate you having me on, John, and I want to say hi to all the other folks who are with you.
I know, right? We've been on here since 6 a.m. They met me at 5:15 a.m., and we've had Al Letizio's finest meats and cheeses.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
And
Hello,
Fred says good morning. So Bill, you were the speaker for one term, and then you guys got crushed in the midterms. But Doucette told me 1,200 votes across the state could have held your majority in the House and Senate, just 1,200 votes. If you spread them across the state in various races, it was that tight. Where do you guys go from here, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, I mean, we're proud of that election, even as I was finishing up as Speaker, because the House did much better in terms of attracting voters during that wave election for the Democrats than any other portion of the ballot. So it was a good result. As you said, it was very, very close. And, we'll be back in the majority again in the New Hampshire House.
So you feel good about...
At this point, we're putting together a great campaign for the U.S. Senate. There's a real enthusiasm about this race.
So what made you decide you were Speaker of the House of Representatives, and what made you decide to run for the U.S. Senate in New Hampshire, Bill O'Brien?
Cycle after cycle, I look at the ballot and I look at candidates who are new to the game and promise to be conservatives. They're great campaign conservatives, and yet we look at the ballot and we wonder, will they really be a conservative when they get to Washington? And quite frankly, we've been disappointed in the past. We've had folks who have been nominated by Republicans will say they're going to be great in the job. You don't worry about me, and then they come back as part of a gang of eight looking to substantially loosen our immigration laws. We're working towards open borders. And at this point, I listened to people who came to me and said, "Bill, we don't want to do that again," and I don't want to do that again, and that compelled me to run. I am the one proven conservative in this race. When I was Speaker of the House, we were able to reduce spending in New Hampshire by over 18%, almost $1 billion. And the reason was because we'd gone through two terms of a Democrat majority who decided that every problem that they could find or imagine needed taxpayer money to be spent on it. And they spent us out to the point where they were convinced we were going to have to, for the first time in New Hampshire, have a sales tax and income tax. I promised that neither would happen. I promised we certain taxes like the surcharge, an $80 million surcharge they put on motor vehicle registration, and we kept those promises. So as they go to the voters this cycle, they know that I will keep my promises.
Okay, we're with Bill O'Brien, former Speaker of the House of Representatives in New Hampshire. He's a Republican. He did not hold his majority in the midterm elections in 2018 in New Hampshire House. The Democrats took over. Now, Bill, running for U.S. Senate, running for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate. Bill, when is the New Hampshire primary for Senate? When is that?
It's going to be still about another 13 months off. It's in September. We have a September primary,
2020?
That's leading up to the November election, 2020.
All right, so you got 13 months away. There's one other announced candidate in it, and that is who Fred, I got to put you on the spot here, Fred. I'm sorry. I know you're all friends, but, I mean, news is news, and it is what it is. Fred Doucette here with us, House of Representatives member, one of your caucus members when you were Speaker, but Fred has already endorsed Brigadier General, who is it?
Don Bolduc.
Don Bolek. So, what's the deal with Bolek, and why do you think you're a better candidate than he is? Bill.
Oh, I thought you were addressing that to Fred.
No, I'll get to him later.
This is your time, Mr. Speaker.
Again, it's being a proven conservative. It's being a conservative who understands the issues. I won't find myself being surprised by questions and then answering them at variance with the way I've described myself, which has already happened with General Bolduc. I understand the process. General Bolduc, for example, at one point was calling for a special session of the Congress, not realizing it was already in session. The special session wasn't necessary. I admire General Bolduc's military service. Indeed, if you are looking for the skills of a great military officer, as my father was for 30 years in the military, I would imagine you look very closely at General Bolduc. If you want to look at courage in a different context, then you have to, I think, look at someone who understands the issues. Courage depends on context. If you want military courage, you have to have someone who has fortitude and an understanding of the situation. It differs not at all when it comes to political courage. You have to have someone who has fortitude, which I showed. But you also have to have someone who understands politics and understands what the issues are. And in that case, I think coming back to New Hampshire after a military career that we all admire, and being here 2 years, and then trying to go around and describe yourself other than headline terms as a conservative, difficult.
I'm looking right now at some of the pictures coming back, Mr. Speaker, from the protest in Hong Kong. And police and protesters now are at a standoff. We'll get back to your other candidates in a minute. I just want to get your thoughts on this. You're running for the United States Senate. If you do happen to win that seat, you might be on the Foreign Relations Committee. You might be on Intel. But looking at this clash right now, Speaker O'Brien, in Hong Kong, where police are now roaming the streets of Hong Kong. Yes, they started with opening the airport. Now they're roaming the streets, and it's very late there. It's, I think, 10:30 p.m. Hong Kong time. They had shipped in, the Chinese Communist government had shipped in, I think, 30,000 or so riot-type police, put them in a soccer stadium, and now they're roaming the streets with the big shields on, trying to crush this protest. If you were in the U.S. Senate now, how would you be reacting to this, and what advice would you be giving both your caucus and President Trump?
We have to make it clear that China is now in the process of violating the 1997 agreement with Britain that was the underpinning of the transfer of Hong Kong into the communist Chinese regime. And that promise was to maintain a separate judiciary, to maintain basic freedoms. And China has been whittling away at it to the point where the people of Hong Kong have risen up. And we have to make it clear, this is what I'd advise the Republican conference and all my Senate colleagues, and I would try to convince the administration as well. We have to make it clear that it won't be business as usual when you're going to have another Tiananmen Square type of episode, whether it is one huge massacre, as we saw in Tiananmen Square in years past, or if it's a slow-moving massacre, which is what we see now, that it won't be business as usual. We have to lean on our allies to stand firm. Countries like Britain and other European Union countries, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, and all the countries of the Pacific Rim who are our natural allies, that it's not going to be business as usual. Very similar to the way we have to oppose China's encroachment into the South China Sea, where they're constructing out of coral atolls and constructing islands and saying that's our territory. It has to be clear that you won't be able to participate as a nation in the community of nations when you're acting like a rogue regime.
So you would
obviously,
take
there's constraints. We can't put military troops into Hong Kong, obviously, but we can signal that there's a price to pay, and it will be paid by China if it is acting this way to the people of Hong Kong.
So you would take a hard line, unlike the Bush did in during the 1989 uprising in Tiananmen Square. Basically, we did nothing. You would advocate a much harder line, getting a coalition together and putting sanctions on China, something of that nature?
Absolutely. What we're watching is the current demonstration of a authoritarian regime that is out of control, and it is behooves us, as well as its great foreign policy, when you see this, to stand up to it. If it were 1938 and we were watching Kristallnacht occur in Germany, where the Nazi regime started its intense, authorized terrorization of its Jewish citizens, we should have all nations should have stood up at that point and say, "You've gone too far. You will go no further." Similar to this communist regime in China, we have to say, violating another agreement that you're a member of, that you signed on to, and oppressing the people of Hong Kong this way means that you are moving out of the community of nations where we deal with you as anything other than a rogue regime. And that should include sanctions on the leaders. It should include sanctions on its trade with the West entirely.
Right. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Bonus hour. We're live in Windham, New Hampshire. We're with former Speaker of the House of Representatives in New Hampshire, Republican Bill O'Brien. Speaker O'Brien is running for the U.S. Senate. He's vying for the Republican nomination. There's one other candidate in it that is Brigadier General, I got to get his name down, guys.
Don Bolduc.
Don Bolduc. I've got to get this down. And anyway, I'm sorry, General, I'm going to get this down. Don Bolduc is in the race. Corey Lewandowski might get in it. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Couple more questions, Mr. Speaker, here live in Windham today. The 60-vote cloture rule. President Trump has called on Mitch McConnell to get rid of this. I call it the incumbent protection hide behind mommy's apron rule. If you're in the Senate, are you going to vote to get rid of the 60-vote cloture rule, yes or no?
Yes. And let me tell you the reason why. In times past, this was a rule that drove consensus. Now it does nothing else other than drive an anti-Trump agenda. And you know, I think we all know to a certainty, that if Chuck Schumer became the majority leader in the Senate, that rule would be gone, and no pun intended, in New York second. It would be gone. And there's no reason at this point that the will of the American people and all the reforms that President Trump is trying to get through should be stymied by a rule that the Democrats are relying on to do nothing more than to be obstructionists.
All right, Mr. Speaker, you'll vote to get rid of the cloture rule. A lot of us for a long time have called on a new AUMF authorization of military force. That's also bottled up by McConnell and the House. Neither chamber will bring it to the floor. Nobody wants to debate these wars, whether it's funding the Saudis and the UAE in the Yemeni civil war, or Syria, or now other conflicts we might get involved in, Venezuela. Nobody wants to make a vote on these wars, so they hide behind the AUMF, which is they're using the same AUMF since 9/11/2001. If you're a U.S. Senator, are you going to vote to get AUMF out of committee and be able to have a debate on that in the well of the Senate, yes or no?
Yes. And the reason is this. There was a time after World War II where the American economy was over half the world economy. and we had to participate throughout the world in maintaining peace and allowing other countries to rebuild themselves along democrat lines, with Germany, Japan, eventually Taiwan and Korea, and protecting France and Italy, if you recall history from resurgent communists in their own country. Those days have passed. The days of American economic predominance in that regard has passed, not because we've become weaker, but because we've been successful. Those countries are successful economically. If you look throughout the world, there are areas where we are taking up the burden almost by ourselves. I think of specifically the Persian Gulf, and others have greater interest in the stability of those areas than we do. They have to stand up, for example, to allow oil traffic to go through, oil tanker traffic to go through the Gulf of Hormuz. We can't do it any longer on our own. And so we have to convince them either you do it or it's not going to be done. And moreover, there's a constant in the Middle East where there's always going to be dysfunctional regimes. It's a dysfunctional area of the world, and in many ways it has to do with the culture of that area. You know, we went into Iraq, I think with justifiable reasons, understanding what we knew at the time, which is that there were likely weapons of mass destruction there. Then we decided to rebuild the country, to bring democracy. And I think back to right after World War I, when Britain took over the mandate for that area and went through a very similar war to what we've gone through.
Bill, we're running out of time. I got to get.
But in the end, it went back to what it's going to be.
I got to get to a couple more questions, so you're on the record as voting for a new AUMF. The president calling for background checks and extension on guns. Let's just change topics here. The president yesterday and the day before advocating Senate legislation by McConnell up to the National Rifle Association and other local gun lobbies and do two things. Number one, close the loophole for background checks, guns that are sold privately, not to family, just out of the back of a truck at a gun show, and other loopholes in the background checks. He wants federal legislation to get rid of that, and he's also called for federal legislation to extend the red flag laws. You're from New Hampshire. This is a gun state. This is what the president has asked for in response to some of the recent shootings we had. If you're in the Senate and this bill comes up, are you going to vote yes or no, Bill?
I would vote against it. You know, one person's loophole is another person's, and as a matter of fact, in New Hampshire, I believe, is a majority of the voters' understanding of what the Second Amendment means, which is a constitutional right to bear arms. I'm not going to impinge on that right in the ways that have been proposed in knee-jerk response to some tragedies that have reasons other than the availability of arms. Reasons such as having no fire zones, no gun zones. You know, the folks who are sick enough to do these things purposely choose areas where they won't be immediately confronted. That's reform I'd like to see. But there's a broader issue here, and the broader issue is that there are folks in our society who are suffering from mental illness, and it's cruel for us not to treat them. If you look at a lot of these shooters, they gave all kinds of signs of people who needed to be cared for. And in some cases, that means institutional care if they won't, for example, agree to effective outpatient care. That's the reform we need. We don't have to impinge on this constitutional rights in ways that would never put up with other important constitutional rights, First Amendment, religious freedom, and so forth. This is a constitutional right, and I don't care to have my right taken away because we are not doing what would be effective to diminish. All right,
so you vote no. Shootings. Final question, Bill, and then we got to roll because I'm running out of time. Final question, Bill O'Brien, announced candidate, U.S. Senate, New Hampshire, Republican. There's one other candidate in it. That is Brigadier General Don Bulldog. We'll get him on soon. This will be decided September 2020. All right, here's the elephant in the room, Bill. Corey Lewandowski has told me he is likely to run for U.S. Senate and likely to start an exploratory committee. And based on my conversations with him, Mr. Speaker, I believe he is going to run in New Hampshire. Poll comes out the other day. Boom, he's at 30%. You're at 9%. He's got name ID. He was Trump's campaign manager. He's from Windham, where I am today. Seriously, how is Bill O'Brien going to defeat Corey Lewandowski in a primary if Corey gets in this race?
A couple of things. I mean, that poll, as you know, was commissioned by a friend of his to convince him to get into the race. So he's not going to portray portions of the poll that would do anything else. I've seen the other portions of the poll. For example, one portion says that, would you consider voting for a candidate? Don Bolduc, only 25% would consider. In my case, 35%, and Corey's 45%. So it's a wide open race. You're never looking better in a race than when you first consider announcing. Everybody goes, oh, fresh face, glad to consider. And then the campaign begins to unfold, and people look at a candidate in full. Don Bolduc has been out there for a while. I've been out there for a while. There will come a time, I assume, when Corey announces he'll be out there for a while. I think based upon what the other information of that poll intended to persuade him to get in show, it's a wide open race, and I look forward to having a very respectful campaign with my good friend, Corey Lewandowski. He and I know each other very well. We've spoken about the fact that he might become a candidate, and the one true promise we've made as good friends is that it'll be a policy race, and we'll see how it unfolds. I expect to win.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's the way to do it, especially when you're between friends and, you can't agree ahead of time who's in and who's out. I think Corey is going to run. He'll be a formidable candidate. You certainly seem in the time that we've had together on top of the issues. And so I look forward to having you back, Mr. Speaker, as we go forward here with our plans to expand our network in New Hampshire. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for being so gracious with your time. And I look forward to a very spirited race between what it seems like to be three pretty good Republican candidates, all wanting to take on Democrat incumbent Jeanne Shaheen. Mr. Speaker, thanks for being with us.
Concentrating on, because she's voted against President Trump 100% of the time, not 97, not 99, 100%.
We can't do that until September.
She's
we'll never do that.
Mainstream here,
Bill,
so,
you know how the media is. We got to cover your race against Lewandowski and the Brigadier General Don Bolduc. I know you'd love to get on and talk about all the reasons why you shouldn't vote for Jeanne Shaheen, but first somebody's got to be the nominee, and that's what me and everybody else are going to be focused on. But I do appreciate the time. Bill, thank you so much. Thank you.